I'm Aaron Rutten, and in this video, I'll be demonstrating the foliage brush pack I created for Rebelle. You can download these brushes from my website at aaronrutten.com. The first brush we'll look at is called Bristly Dabs. I'll be selecting a lot of green colors since these are foliage brushes. You might also want to enable pigment blending for a more natural color blending. With dab brushes, you want to tap your pen and lift it up and tap it again to make dabs like so. You want to use very light pressure because if your pressure is too firm, it might not work. So just very, very, very light pressure. Instead of using the pen, you can also use your mouse and you can click to make dabs if you want more controlled dabs. The size of the brush controls the size of the features within the dab. So if I make my brush larger, those features are larger. If I make my brush smaller, then those features are much finer. As you can see, the leaves in this dab are much smaller. You can reset any of these brushes to their defaults at any time using the reset button. I'll press delete to clear this layer. There is a little bit of color variation in these dabs, as you can see, but it's very monochromatic. Most of the brushes in this set can utilize multicolored mode. So if I enable this, I'll first put down some green color here. Then I'll select a different color, like yellow, put some leaves next to that. Then I'll hold X and I will click between these two to load these colors on the brush. And now I get a mixture of the two colors when I make dabs. This mixture will eventually run out and it will turn into a mixture of the two colors. But you can just hold X and load more paint on the brush to load it up again. I'll disable multicolored brush mode because it will stay active for any brush you select. Right now my paint is pretty opaque, but if I wanted to thin it out, I can change the loading setting and I can get thinner paint. This paint will be more transparent. I'll reset this brush. I can make my color lighter and build up leaves to create form. Add a bit of bright yellow to this. I can even switch to the blending mode. I can either do it here or I can press V on my keyboard. And I can even blend these colors together a bit. And again, these are controls that you can apply to most of these brushes. You can also hold 5 or select this mode here to erase. And this will erase with the shape of the brush so I can create negative space in between the leaves as well. I'll reset the brush to go back to the default painting mode. Let's try Bushy Dabs next. I'll tap with this brush, again using light pressure, and I get a different type of dab that has bigger leaves that are a bit more angular. I'll select a darker green and tap on some darker green leaves. Again, light pressure works better. Then I'll select yellow and I'll blend some yellow into that. Again, if it's too thick, you can reduce the loading and that'll give you more of a blend. If you overdo it, you can always put more green back over that. As with the previous brush, the brush size controls the feature size. Let's bring the loading back up here so we can see this. So now these leaf shapes are much finer. And again, just as a reminder, you could use multicolored mode and you can blend and you can do negative painting. Let's see what Clumpy Dabs can do. Again, I can click with my mouse or I can tap lightly with my pen to create dabs. We'll add some lighter colors to that. If I zoom in closely, you can see these dabs are a bit more clumpy. They have thicker paint. So I can switch to the blending mode with V and I can kind of blend this together. Or I can paint across it without dabbing. And that'll really mix it up and create all these different leaf patterns. I can go to the eraser mode and I can subtract from the paint. And you can see that all the while it maintains that thickness. I'll go back to the painting mode and I'll dab in some more blobs here. You can modify this paint thickness in two different ways. One, we can go to the visual settings and also open the brush creator. And I'll just move visual settings down a bit here. The impasto depth in visual settings is a global setting, so this will control the impasto depth for your whole painting, regardless of which brush you used. And as you can see, I can make those clumps very thick. And if I were painting a tree and I wanted nice thick leaves, then I can very easily get that. I can reduce the loading to make the paint less thick. then I get sort of a transparent paint, and I might not want that. I'll reset the brush. Another way to change the paint thickness per stroke is to go to Paint in the Brush Creator, and under Max Impasto Height, if I reduce that, then I don't get any thickness. If I increase it all the way, then I get tons of thickness, so I can really fine-tune per stroke how much thickness I get for this brush. And again, I can fine-tune that globally here in the visual settings. So maybe this is the look I want. I'll reset the Impasto depth to 5 and reset this brush. And again, one last reminder, a lot of these brushes can use multicolored mode. So I can hold X and load several colors on my brush, and I can get these nice thick splats that have several colors. If I want to clean the brush, I just disable multicolored brush mode. Now that we're done with these dabs, let's move on to some of these evergreen brushes. We'll start with Fan Evergreen. I'll pick a nice evergreen color. You can use pen tilt to control the angle of the dab. So if my pen's tilted this way, then my dab goes this direction. But if I tilt it this way, or even this way, then my dab goes a different direction. And I can, of course, angle it like so. The trick with this brush is to try to have your dabs be flat like this. And then you start with light pressure at the top, and you use heavier pressure and kind of zigzag back and forth as you move down to create this really nice evergreen tree. And you can fill in the middle, and if you need to touch up the top, you can do that as well. You can really quickly and easily put in tons of evergreen trees. You might need to spruce them up a bit. To do that, you'll select the Evergreen Form brush, and then you can lock the transparency of this base layer you created. Select a lighter color, and paint over it the same way. Start with light pressure, use heavier pressure as you work your way toward the bottom. Make my color even lighter. Then if you overdo it, you can always sample that darker color and add back in a shadow side. And that gives us some pretty nice looking evergreen trees. Now there is one thing missing, and that's a trunk. So I'll just create a new layer for that. And the next brush we'll look at is Fine Brush. We'll select a brownish color here. And this brush works really well to create tree trunks. I might make that a bit lighter. Just use light pressure and then heavier pressure near the bottom, and you'll get that nice tapered effect. The size of your brush will control the thickness of this line. So if I make my brush larger, I'm going to get a thicker line, and if I make it thinner, then I'll get a thinner line. You'll notice there's a bit of texture in this stroke. And again, you can control that here in the brush creator. You can reduce the max impasto height if you don't want as much or none at all. I'll reset this brush because I think a little bit looks nice. You could even put in little branches. And of course, some of the leaves would be covering this trunk. So you can go back to Fan Evergreens, set it to the erase mode, and just cover some of it. Oh, we have a pretty nice looking stand of trees. I'll delete this layer and the other layer just to clear it out. Let's move on to take a look at Far Evergreens. These are for when your painting is seen and you have lots of trees that are very far away. If you increase your pressure, those trees will get a little bit bigger. But as you begin to move into the foreground, you'll want to use the right bracket key to make your brush bigger so that those trees get bigger and we maintain that sense of perspective. I can lock the transparency. Then if I wanted to select a lighter color, I can kind of go over some of these trees and give them a little bit of color variation or shading. I'll disable lock transparency. Now these trees are all pretty similar in size. If we want them to be more variable, then we can choose Far Evergreens Vari. And now when I paint, there's going to be more of a variation. You can see some of these brushes are tall and skinny and some are short. So it just gives me more variety. Let's move on to the next brush, which is called Foliage Down. This is another brush that can be angled with the tilt of your pen. So as you can see, I can make the leaves point in various directions. In addition to a pen that supports pen tilt, if you have a pen like the Wacom Art pen that can sense barrel rotation, you can use barrel rotation rather than tilt, and that makes it easier to have the leaves point up or down without having to tilt your pen at an awkward angle. For example, if I wanted the leaves to go up, I have to do something kind of like this, which is not easy. What you can do instead is go to shape and grain in the brush creator, and if you're having trouble painting at a certain angle, you can rotate this dab and the next one, and now it'll be easier to have those leaves point up. So even though this is called foliage down, you could have it for foliage that goes up as well. Your pen pressure or your brush size controls the scale of the features. So if I make my brush really small, then those leaf features are very small. If I make it very big, then those leaf features are very large. I can, of course, layer up colors like so. If this paint is too thick, I can control the loading. I can just hold Control and drag down and do it very intuitively like this. And again, there's multicolored mode, if I want to use that. And negative painting and blending as well. I'll reset this brush and disable multicolored brush mode. Let's jump over to grass long. If I paint a stroke with this brush, you can see it creates a grass that is pretty tall. Lighter pressure creates thinner, fainter grass. Heavier pressure creates thicker, more opaque grass. The size of the brush is going to control the feature scale. So again, I can press right bracket as I move into the foreground, and my grass will get taller and maintain that sense of perspective. I can switch to a different color, and if I use lighter pressure, I can paint across this and add some color variety to my grass here. If I zoom in closely, there is a bit of thickness to this paint. We can see that if we play with the impasto depth. If you don't like that thickness, you can go to paint and you can remove the max impasto height, and now you won't get any. If you want more of it, you can increase it, and you can make your paint really thick. I'll just reset this brush. In addition to long grass, you can also create grass that is short. I'll put some of that in. It works the same way. Lighter pressure gives you thinner, fainter grass. Heavier pressure gives you grass that is thicker and more opaque. You can increase your brush size to make the feature scale of the grass larger. You can layer up the colors. And of course, you can play with the thickness of the paint. You can enable multicolored brush mode, and you can create grass that has multiple colors in it. I'll reset this brush and disable multicolored mode. Let's give grass knife a try. These other grass brushes are very repetitive and uniform, but if you wanted to draw individual grass blades, you can do that as well. You can start your stroke from the top and go down, and that might help it look more tapered. As you can see, you can really combine these two brushes to help it look more natural. The size of your brush controls the size of the grass blades. So if you want those to be thicker, then you make your brush bigger. And if you want them to be thinner, make your brush smaller. I can select a lighter color here, and I can add some grass blades on top of these. You could also make your brush bigger. And if you do the right kind of short tapered strokes, this might work well for painting individual leaves. Or if you had something like a plant that's growing on the ground that has leaves, you could add them like so. Let's see what the Leafy brush can do. Let's do some fall time leaves here. As you can see, this brush creates these nice fractal shapes. Again, the size of the brush controls the size of the features. This paint has some thickness to it. So again, I can customize that here. We can also do negative painting and subtract from it. We can blend it together to mix up the colors. And we can use multicolor and a lot of the other features that we looked at earlier. Let's see how this looks with some green leaves. I'll put in my darker ones first. I can build this up, and even lighter. I get this really nice tree or bush. Oily Forest is an interesting brush. I'm going to select kind of a distant green color. And I'm going to paint a stroke with firm pressure. And we're going to imagine that we're looking at some hills that are far away that are covered in evergreen trees. If I use heavy pressure, I'm going to get an opaque stroke like this. If I use light pressure, then I'm just going to blend at some point. So what I want to do is use heavy pressure at the top of the stroke and lighter pressure at the bottom and fade it out like this. That way I create this nice misty effect near the bottom. Then I'll go near the bottom like this, and I'll put in another layer, and I will fade that out. If I make my color darker as I do this, that's going to further enhance the sense of distance. But what will also help is if I increase my brush size a bit to make the scale of those trees larger. Let's make my brush bigger, make my color darker, and just keep putting in layers. And if I need to, I can go back in here and fill it in a bit more. Now I get this really nice distant forest effect. And you can hold 5 and you can go into negative painting mode if you want to subtract from the tops of some of these trees. You can go into blending mode if you just want to strictly blend. Here's a brush called Sharp Leaves. This is another brush that can be angled. So if I tilt my pen, I can get all these different angles. Or if I switch to the Wacom Art Pen, that makes it much easier because then I can just rotate the barrel like so. And I don't have to have my arm at really awkward angles. If I use lighter pressure, then that's going to give me more texture in my strokes, and it's also going to make the feature size smaller. If I use heavier pressure, those strokes get more opaque and the features get broader. So I can put in a really nice tree like this. Make sure it's filled in the middle here. I'll select a lighter green. And when I go to add my shading, if it's too thick like this, what I can do is go to the brush creator, look under stroke, and I can reduce this opacity slider here, not the loading. So for this particular brush, that's how you need to do it. Make the opacity a bit thicker here. Now you can see I can build up this tree and get these really nice leaf effects. I can also switch to the blending mode, and I can blend it a little bit like this. I can hold 5 and switch to erase mode, and I can subtract. May want to increase that opacity back up so that I get a sharper edge. If I want a sharper edge, I think that gives me a really nice effect. The final brush in this pack is tree clusters. We'll start with a dark green. This is another brush that you can angle using pen tilt or rotation. So I'm going to paint some clusters of trees here. We'll demonstrate on something else where it will make more sense, but I just want you to see how this brush works at first. If I build up strokes, then they're going to get lighter. So I can keep painting in the same spot and the color will get brighter and brighter. That's happening because if we look under paint, then we have paint blending set to screen. If I open this painting of a mountain, we can put this in context. So I'll just select a dark green color, paint some trees that go up the side of the mountain like this. We'll make our color a bit lighter and we'll go over it to add some details to the trees. And I'm making these really bright so that you can see them very easily here, but you would of course want them to blend in more naturally. Good way to do that is to not let your green get too bright. So if you start with a darker, more desaturated green, that's going to make it easier for you. You can also make the brush larger if you want to cover more area at once. And if you're having trouble finding the right green, you can go to Filter, Hue Saturation, and you can play with the slider here. You can see that fits in better. You can make it more or less saturated, and you can control the lightness. So if I zoom in here, you can see it looks like there's all types of little trees growing up the side of the mountain. That's all for this demonstration. If you'd like to purchase these brushes, you can find them at aaronrutten.com.